Proofreading can be challenging for students. Many times students may think that proofreading has to be this long, detailed process that basically starts from the beginning of the paper to the end. However, what they oftentimes do not realize is that there are some simple techniques that can actually be done fairly quickly, depending on time, meeting deadlines, and so on. So what I'm going to do is describe various proofreading techniques from the most basic and perhaps even the most quickest, efficient ways to proofread to some of the more complex proofreading techniques that perhaps students need to use if they're in a scientific program, if they're all the way over to perhaps completing a dissertation where every single comma and word choice can be critical. So let's go ahead and look at some of these techniques. So first off, scanning is a process of going through the paper and looking for specific information. Many times students do not refer to scanning as a proofreading technique. Rather, they consider the second part of my presentation here, they consider proofreading to be only reading the content. And many times reading the content can actually prevent students from finding mistakes and can prevent other authors from finding mistakes. So let's first look at scanning, which can be a very efficient, effective way of finding errors. In our list here, I have typos, APA information, reference lists, spelling, paragraph structure. So let's go through each one at a time here. Typos, what that basically is I would define typos as simply, perhaps pressing on the keyboard, pressing a period or some sort of extra space or something that you did not intend to do. And you just kept on writing your paper, and then once the paper is over, if you fail to proofread it, then these types of errors will be fairly obvious to the reader. I've seen many silly errors that it was quite obvious to me that the reader did not proofread at all. So for this first type of scanning method, basically what you do is from the beginning to the end of the paper, and then perhaps again from the end to the beginning, just look for simple mistakes that were due to accidentally doing something, such as failing to indent a paragraph or providing an extra space where it shouldn't be. There are many different errors that you can make, and by simply scanning the paper, you're likely to catch many of these types of errors. The second becomes now a little bit more detailed, but is still a scanning technique and can still be fairly efficient, yet very effective, and that is looking for APA formatting mistakes. Now what we're talking about here would be, this involves a little bit more in-depth knowledge because you have to know the APA rules, but this might include the margins on a paper, making sure that perhaps the margins aren't more or less than they should be, and that can be fairly obvious even if you don't know the rule. I've seen before where students just have a ridiculously large or small margin around their paper or on the top or bottom. It can also include the running head, a title page, perhaps not having a reference list. All of the various basic APA formatting issues that students should learn, particularly when they're in an academic program or graduate program in the area of psychology. So once again, scan through the paper and look for all these things. Again, title, running head, section headings, margins, all of the various basic elements of APA style. The next time you scan, so now what we've done is essentially we've scanned our whole entire paper twice, but for a short paper, 2, 3, 5 pages long, this can actually be very quick. Then the next time we scan, we are going to look specifically for APA citations. And what I mean by that is going through the paper, again, from beginning to end, or end to the beginning, which can be effective. I said that a couple times now. That can be effective because you're looking at your paper in a different way, so you're sometimes more likely to catch the information. So, but what you do for this method is look at every single in-text citation and make sure that it's properly formatted. Make sure, for instance, that you're using the ampersand, the symbol for and within parentheses. You're using the word and outside of parentheses. Making sure that when you have multiple authors that you're formatting proper with commas and some of those things. So you look through your entire paper and make sure you're properly citing the information. And then as soon as you do that, we move on to our next scanning technique, and that's looking at the reference list. Now that you've just looked at all of those in-text citations, now we look at the reference list and look for simple errors, such as making sure the reference list is in alphabetical order, to more complex errors, and that is making sure each reference itself has the author's last names and other critical information. Even if you make some errors with comma placement or period placement or what have you, you should be able to, by scanning each one of those references, catch, again, some simple basic mistakes. These last two, correcting in-text citations and correcting your reference list, are very, very important, because failing to do that could result in a plagiarism issue, or even an academic integrity issue. One a bit more time-consuming and more of an advanced technique that should also be done is to scan now the paper and compare the in-text citations actually to the reference list. So in other words, making sure that every time there's a reference cited, so let's say Rodriguez is cited within the paper, then you go right on down to the reference list and make sure Rodriguez is included in the reference list. And you must do it the other way as well, because you may include something in the reference list but not include them in the paper. So you need to go back and look at the reference list, pick the first item. So let's say the first one is Anderson, begins with A, it's first on our list. So let's say we see Anderson. We go through our paper and make sure we have cited Anderson in the paper. This mistake can commonly occur for longer papers, such as the biggest extreme perhaps might be a dissertation where there might be 100 or 150 references, and as a student is deleting information, moving it around, they may forget that they removed or added different references. And then the final two, so spelling, paragraph structure, we get a little more complex. Spelling can be fairly easy. Use your spell check and go back through and see if there's some items highlighted. I've caught many students before not correcting spelling. And then paragraph structure. This also can be fairly simple, and that's just if you understand the basics of paragraph structure, which I will not go into detail, you should be able to recognize if you have, for example, a one-sentence paragraph. You know there's probably something wrong there. Or a paragraph maybe that takes up the whole entire page. You probably know there's something going on there too that might be a challenge. So you can look at how the paragraphs are structured, the amount of content in each of those, and then that might hint that you need to do some additional proofreading and go through that paragraph and look at it in greater detail. So with that being said, how do you do that? All right, so let's transition to the next proofreading techniques. I'm going to go through these here a bit quicker. And that is because I don't need to necessarily explain this in detail, because it involves a much more lengthy conversation, and that is how to structure sentences, how to structure paragraphs, what to include in various sections, and some of those things. So for that help, you would, if you struggle with that, students would need to go somewhere else to seek additional help. But for now, when I comment, when you're reading a paper, and I make the suggestion here to read by sentence and section, what I'm talking about there is reading specifically one sentence at a time and pausing and thinking about how could I write this sentence more effectively, and then doing that with the next sentence and the next and so on. It can be obviously much more time consuming, but that is how indeed you can catch various mistakes when it comes to grammar, punctuation, and overall sentence structure, like run-on sentences or sentences that are just too short, whatever it may be. Some other techniques. Read aloud. Read that paper out loud. Read it to yourself. Read it yourself in front of a mirror. Read it to a friend. These various techniques will help you catch mistakes, because when you're reading out loud, you can hear yourself, or someone else, even better yet, can hear you and correct mistakes. And in the same token, have them read it to you, because all of a sudden, if you have someone reading you your work, you again will be able to be more likely to hear what they are saying, and all of a sudden you're going to probably start hearing sentences that could be restructured and stated a different way, so your language and your message is a bit more clear. When I recommend reading it backwards, that would be, for example, if you really wanted to focus on a high level of detail and skill and accuracy and precision, then if you read each sentence starting with the end of the document to the beginning, that will really help you create more effective sentences, because now you're reading it in a different way and you're more likely to catch mistakes than it just happens that when you're writing a long document especially, and you're writing and reading it many, many times, all of a sudden you stop seeing some of the mistakes you're making. And then finally, this would be perhaps one of the more advanced, time-consuming ways to proofread a paper, but that would be to read it out loud. As you're doing that, record yourself, and then you will not only catch mistakes as you're reading out loud, but then if you watch that recording, then you will also indeed begin to catch more and more mistakes. As you can see in summary, the first techniques I described can take literally seconds and even less than a minute to do some of those techniques, all the way up to a very much more time-consuming process, but often a process that also is needed, especially for high-level documents, and especially for documents that perhaps students or other individuals want to publish. So I hope this helps. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. My name is Dr. Dan, and I just thank you for this time.